Okay, wonderful. I wasn't sure if it was on or not, and then I realized it was. Great, I'll just pop this here. Oh, someone's upset. Right, I'll put that there. Good. So, today, the commandments we're going through, I was just saying there was a few ladies here for the very first time. We're going through the commandments, and the commandments were written in the Old Testament. They're about 300 words long, and they are the basis of what God said to his people when he brought them out of Egypt. He said, these are the commandments I'm going to give you, and if you can live by them. And they're the basis of, in the Western world, they're the basis of most legal systems, the 10 Commandments. And so we've been going through them one at a time. They were written 3,500 years ago, but they are so relevant today. And so I'm going to go through the 10 Commandments, all right? No other gods before me, no idols, don't misuse the name of the Lord, keep the Sabbath day holy, honor your mom and dad, you shall not murder. Today's one is you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, don't tell lies, and you shall not covet. That's just roughly. There's a lot longer. I've just given you the quick rules, okay? So today, you shall not commit adultery. You know, I was looking at all the different versions, and even in the Amplified version that always has lots and lots of words, it still says you shall not commit adultery. Okay, so that's what it is, and that's what we're going to be looking at. And the seventh commandment isn't about the final act of adultery, okay? Because when you read it, you're like, oh, adultery, good, I haven't done that one, that's okay. But it's not about the final act of adultery. It's actually about the lust of the heart. Okay? And adultery is when your heart is stolen. Remember when we looked about idols, and it said in the Bible about, don't have any idols, and we were thinking, well, we don't worship a golden idol, or there's no idols in my, physical idols. But we were speaking about how different things can become idols in your world. And the idols take your focus off the Lord. And it's the same with adultery. Adultery is when your focus is taken, your heart gets attracted to something else or someone else, and your focus is lost. So adultery is about when your heart is stolen. J. John said a very interesting thing. He said, adultery is the shabbiest betrayal of the deepest and most intimate trust. Okay? It's the shabbiest betrayal of the deepest and the most intimate of trust. Now, in our society, sex is everywhere. Sex is absolutely everywhere. It is sold everywhere. We find it difficult not to see it. It's everywhere. And so there's messages that go out all the time. People will say, sex is no big deal. It's okay. It's not a big deal. There's messages everywhere about sex. The media, the advertising. You can use sex to sell cars. You can, you hear about people who have been promoted at work because they've slept with someone or because something has happened. At all sporting events, they say that the trafficking and the pornography, the trafficking and the prostitution that goes on at these big sports events is through the roof. It's always very hidden. It's used to sell ice cream. It's used to sell toothpaste. It's used to sell deodorant. It is everywhere. Our culture worships it. It's very, very difficult to ignore. Years and years ago, pornography was something that was confined to the magazines on the top shelf in a news agent, or on the page 3 of certain tabloids. You would see something and you thought, oh, well, that's pornography. I can avoid it. But now, pornography is literally in our hands. It is in our phone. It is the most accessible thing we can get. It is so easily available. And that has become the biggest issue. There was a little song, some of you older ones will remember, being in Sunday school, and they sang, oh, I won't sing it. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. There's a Father up above looking down in tender love. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little hands, what you do. Be careful, little hands, what you touch. Be careful, little feet, where you walk. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. And you know, it's a simple little song, but you know, that is what we need to do. We need to look and take control of our five senses and everything, because there is a massive force out there to lure us in. So interesting that some of the verses in the Bible were written, you know, Proverbs was written all those years ago, hundreds of years ago. And yet in Proverbs it says, I've got the verse somewhere here. It speaks about there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to destruction. And so adultery has come into our world. I think, you know, when you read the Proverbs and you read some things in the Bible, it was always about the woman who seduces, and it was all about the woman was the one that was a seductive force, and the man would fall, and that's how it happened. But actually nowadays it is very much, women can seduce, but men can seduce as well, and everyone has to take responsibility for it. So years ago we had to look for it, but now it's available in our hands, and that's why as this church we are going to pray and pray and pray and cover our children, cover our teenagers, because the world that they are living in now is vastly, vastly different than what we grew up in, and it is a very difficult world. Okay, anybody remember the 9 o'clock watershed? Yeah. The 9 o'clock watershed, and then after that things took place, but before that you wouldn't hear swearing, you wouldn't see this, you wouldn't see that. Nowadays that's all gone by the wayside. There was a whole bunch of things. I started writing down some of the rise in the reality shows. Remember, Big Brother started, 10, 15 years ago, and now since then it has exploded. These are some of the programs that are on our television that are there for us to watch. Naked Attraction, Love Island, Embarrassing Bodies, Sex Clinic, How to Look Good Naked, one called Sexy Tats, where you get tattoos on intimate parts of your body. I mean, Embarrassing Bodies, I've seen these people coming on, because sometimes it's interesting. I like watching medical things, and I'm like, oh, I wonder, they have different things. And then it was like, I can't show my boyfriend this part of my body, but I'm willing to show the whole of Great Britain. And like, what's gone wrong with us? What's wrong with us? Why are we lying there displaying our intimate parts to the whole country, but we can't show our husband because we're too embarrassed? Something has gone wrong with our society. So I was going to click on this here just to read some of these things out. So I actually I was on the iPad and I thought, right, so I Googled, as you do. And I was, the funny thing was, I Googled, sites that allow you to have affairs even though you're married. And I was actually working on Ian's computer, and I actually had to confess to Leanne, because I thought, oh my goodness, I've done this, and I was reading it, and I thought, I hope the church doesn't come under it. So I'm just saying now, okay? Right, because they can trace you and all this. Anyways, so I Googled these sites, and this is what it says to bring you into it, to lure you in. All marriages fall apart. Married dating sites often become inevitable. After all, you only live once. Then there's the best things to fulfill your fantasies. Now, while you have time, and you still have your good looks, have an affair. Besides, even if you don't live once, surely you will be forgiven by your chosen deity for getting laid by that hot, smoldering vixen or stud that you've always coveted. Not to worry, we have the best sites reviewed. Here they are. And then they start speaking about them. I was shocked. I was getting palpitations, and I quickly took a screenshot of the different sites, and then I came off it. I actually, because when you've been in a church and you're pastoring people, I have seen the other side. I have seen girls coming to me brokenhearted, devastated. They have found their husbands, and I'm talking sometimes about Christian girls. They have found their husbands have got a profile on Ashley Madison. Their husband is on Tinder. Different things like that, and it's there. We just need to open our eyes up and realize. So I'm not going to go through all the different sites, but it was awful. And Ashley Madison, that's the most popular one. Their tagline is, "Life is short, have an affair." That is their tagline. There's a porn hub. One of the porn hubs has an annual, now I did get this from J. John, so I didn't have to, I got the information and closed it down, okay? The porn hub has an annual revenue of $97 million, and that is an old statistic. And this is only one site. I've seen 10 different sites in here, the top 10 in Great Britain. And C.S. Lewis said a very interesting thing many years ago. A man with an obsession is a man who has very little sales resistance. And that's true. You're focused on a car. You need a new car. You think about it. You dream about it. You're reading magazines. You're looking at reviews and everything. You go, and when you go to the garage, they have you because you are so obsessed and so willing to buy a car that they can convince you to buy things because, just like C.S. Lewis said, a man or a woman with an obsession is a man or a woman with very little sales resistance. And if you have allowed yourself to open that door, to look at those sites, to do different things, to watch a program on television, if you have opened that door, then you will be drawn into that. And that is Satan's ploy. So in our culture, it's very interesting. In our culture today, we have, in the 60s came, everyone's like, woohoo, free love and the hippie movement and the mini skirts and the contraceptive pill and all those things. It was all free. The door was open, sleep around, it's all good. But the sad, sad reality, 50, 60 years later, the sad reality is that we have more teenage pregnancies now. We have all the education about it. We have more teenage pregnancies in our country. It's at an all-time high. The depressingly high levels of abortion in our country are huge. The STDs, sexually transmitted diseases are through the roof. Rapes, grooming, online dating and pressures. It is unbelievable. So everything has gone up and ramped up a huge level. Is it possible, and there's a question I'm going to ask you, is it possible that the very gateway that we thought to sexual freedom has become the doorway to slavery for the whole world of sex? And we thought it was freedom in the 60s, and we now realize that we've got a culture that's enslaved and drawn into, and it's just awful. When you read some of these stories about grooming and people getting our young children and children taking pictures of themselves and putting them up there, why would they do that? They do it because they're in isolation. Our language has changed. Who says the word adultery nowadays? You never hear the word adultery. It's a fling, a casual sex. It's an affair. It's harmless fun. It's an outlet. It's consensual fun. You see how we've dumbed down the whole thing? We've dumbed it all down. And actually the fact is, half of marriages will end in divorce. And we throw around these statistics and go, yeah, half will end in divorce. And we almost become desensitized to it. And we're like, oh, well, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And I'm like, no. I remember speaking to a lovely young girl, and many years ago, she doesn't come to this church, and many years ago, and she said at her wedding, her father had given a speech for her, and her father says, don't come crying to me if he has an affair. And then he says, don't come crying to me. He says, you sort it out. And then he said, and the second time he has an affair, don't come crying to me. And then she said, if it happens a third time, we'll maybe take him seriously. And everybody laughed. This was in Africa. And she said the culture there is, and I'm not saying this all true, but in where they were, she says the culture is that men do have affairs, and it is just normal. You just have to suck it up and get on with it. And the fact that he said, if they have an affair, it's almost saying to your future son-in-law, by the way, I'm expecting you to maybe have an affair, almost giving him permission. So that was really difficult. So anyways, let's get back to do not commit adultery. To understand why adultery is a sin, we must understand what marriage is, okay? So to understand why it is a sin, we must understand what marriage is. In Genesis 2:24, it was God's idea. He said, that is why a man will leave his father and mother, and it's united with his wife, and they will become one flesh. Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. So this is how God intended. Sex was his idea. Okay? So there's 3 points as to what the Bible says about marriage. It's leaving. It's leaving your parents, it's leaving what you had and is coming together and living together as man and wife. It's uniting, and it's uniting emotionally, socially, personally, and living for each other, living in an unselfish world. Can you see why it's difficult nowadays when everybody's about me and mine? And so those two things, it's leaving, it's uniting, and the third thing is the sex bit, which is becoming one flesh. And so that's what the Bible has to say on marriage. And in Proverbs 14:12 it says, there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death. So it's just this warning to be careful and to be vigilant. God's design was marriage between a man and a woman, nothing else. It was a man and a woman. In Matthew 5 verses 27 to 28, you have heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery. This is Jesus' words. He's speaking. But I say to you, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And I thought, that's a little bit harsh, you know. Imagine looking that way. And I remember, I always used to kind of wonder what that meant. But now the way pornography is, now the way everything is around us so much, and it's so prevalent in our society, I realize what he's talking is actually you're losing your first love. You're actually giving your heart away to something else, because it is all about the heart. There was a wonderful quote here by a theologian that said, sin will take you further than you wanted to go. It will cause you to stay longer than you wanted to stay, and it will make you pay more than you wanted to pay. And so there's two cycles we're going to look at. There's the lust cycle, okay? So bearing that quote in mind, the lust cycle starts off with you see something. It is often what you see. Maybe someone said something really lovely to you, and you're like, oh wow, you know, but quite often you're attracted by what you see, okay? And so with the lust cycle, as you see something, now I know I have been at home and I've watched, you know, I've been flicking through channels. I was like, oh my goodness, I think it's that program, I did mention it, Naked Attraction. I can't believe that in this day and age you have a program that everyone stands and they view each other. You know, we used to have Cilla Black that did Blind Date. And you know, you were behind the screen, you were fully clad, and they would ask questions and like, oh, a lot of, you know, she was so fun, and you would listen to it and you'd wonder if they would ever get together and all this. Now they're like, okay, this is what it is, you strip off. And they stand there, and this person then chooses which one to have. And I remember, like, I flicked on, I was like, what in the name of goodness? And I watched it. And it was just like, this is awful. That, you know, it was a man looking at all these women. I was like, I've never seen. And I was watching. So I thought, this isn't good for me. So I flicked it over. But you know what? Within about 10 minutes, I was drawn back to see what was the next stage of that. You know, because you just saw a bit of it. And you were drawn back to see what the outcome was. And then, two or three times, I felt myself drawn back to see what happened. So this is my confession, okay? And I was gobsmacked. So anytime I see it now, I don't even flick it on. I don't even. But I was just so shocked. I just think I sat there with my mouth open. I thought, is this possible on one of our channels that you can watch this kind of stuff? And I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said that her little girl was over at her grandma's, and they were watching TV and blah, blah, blah. And grandma fell sound asleep, and they came to pick up their little girl, and they walked in, and the little girl was watching Naked Attraction. Grandma had fallen asleep. They'd been watching a program on Channel 4, and grandma had fallen asleep, and then this program came on, and this little girl, this little tutu, was 6 or 7, was halfway through watching this program. You see how subtle these messages are, and how wrong it is, and how they're ruining our children. So the first thing is, you are drawn to something and you see something. Like I was like shocked, and I found myself drawing back. And you just think about the media, scrolling through things. How many times are we scrolling through things and something pops up and you look at something and then it throws you into something else and throws you into something else, you know? The next thing is the love drugs that are stored up in your brain, you know, like dopamine and things like that. They are there, and they do something to you. They kind of excite you. It turns you on. There's something that starts working, and you're almost drawn to have a second glance. The thoughts are like, well, just have another glance. It's going to be okay. Just have another look. And then the feelings of guilt start to come in, and then your mind. Then the second stage is your mind begins to pester you for just another glimpse, and then suddenly you watch it again, and then you go off again, and then you're consumed, and you come back again, and you're drawn in again, and then suddenly the next time you're in that situation, you're by yourself, you feel led to do it again. And then before you know it, this pattern of addiction has started. And I just think, be careful. And I thought, what am I going to say to the girls today? I was so anxious bringing this. And then I was looking at the statistics, and actually, and I wrote them down here, 1 in 3 users of pornography are women. So this is just not a man issue. We can't just pat ourselves and go, oh, it's all about the men. No, we are in this as well. I have counseled people over the years, and they've broken down and said, I'm really addicted to pornography. And I remember thinking, surely not. It happens. And I just am thinking, my goodness, I admire your courage to come and actually open up and share something. And they just go so high up in my estimation. They come with all the shame. And I'm like, my goodness, you're doing so well. You're naming it. You're saying, no, there's a line drawn in the sand. I don't want to go beyond this. And so it says, I just think suddenly the voice, once this cycle gets established, suddenly the voice that has said to you, it's no big deal. It's only a glimpse. What are you worried about? It's nothing. It's the same voice that condemns you and tells you that you're full of shame, and tells you that you can't tell anybody about it, and you are such a bad Christian, and you're this and that. The very voice that lured you in is the very voice that condemns you. But I want to tell you, in Romans 8 verse 1, it says, there is no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus. No condemnation. So when that voice tells you to say, no, I'm starting afresh, there is a line drawn in the sand, I'm not going there. So as well as the lust cycle, there is a love cycle. And this is what the love cycle is like. The first thing, live in the light. Bring everything out into the light. In Proverbs 28, verse 13, it says, whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but whoever confesses and renounces them finds mercy. Isn't that beautiful? So live in the light. Don't pretend. Don't fool yourself. Don't kid yourself on. Bring it out into the light and speak about it. The second thing is get clearer vision. Get clearer vision. Don't settle for second best. Don't think, oh my goodness, this is my life now. No. Focus on Jesus. Your focus has been away. Your heart has been drawn to something else. Bring it back. So live in the light and focus on Jesus. Focus on Him. The third thing is make choices to live differently. There's a characteristic about a lion. A lion is the king of the beasts. And a lion will never run after a herd. A lion will look for an individual. He'll look for the isolated animal in the pack. And when he sees the isolated one, he will stalk it, and then he will pounce on it. So Satan is like that. If you find yourself not having good fellowship, pulling back from church, not reading your Bible the same, just your heart's not as strong as it used to be, you're finding yourself in an isolated position. And what I would say is, it says Satan is like a roaring lion, roaring to and fro, looking whom he may devour. And he's not going to go after a group of people. He's not going to go after a whole thing. He's going to go after the individual. And so be aware. So choose to live differently, and choose to not flirt or cuddle. You don't flirt with a lion or go up to a lion and cuddle it or give it a little treat. Here, kitty, kitty. No, you don't even flirt with it. You run from it. And so if you find yourself isolated, get back into the pack, get back into the ministry, get back into accountability, and choose to live differently. Lean into the love of God and find yourself. So living in the light, getting a better vision, and choosing to live differently. I'm just going to mention this here. I can't speak about this without speaking about the example in the Bible about David. King David, it says, was an incredible king. The Lord loved him. He did amazing things. But after about 20 years, he has conquered many things. He has won many battles. He has done great things. And it says in the Bible, in the spring, at the time when all the kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. And they went out and destroyed things. But David remained in Jerusalem. One afternoon, David was taking his nap and he was strolling on the roof of the palace, and from his vantage point, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was stunningly beautiful, and he realizes who it is, and he calls for her, and he says, can you go and get me that woman? And even on the way there, his servant says, oh no, but that's Uriah's wife. You don't want her. Just get her. So there was a check in his spirit. There was a check from a godly person, but he chose to ignore it. And so he goes and gets her. We know the story. He was pregnant. He got her pregnant. The first thing was David was isolated. He stayed at home instead of being with the pack. He found himself, his heart was, he felt himself a little bit entitled. He felt himself, I'm on my own, I'm the king, I can get whatever I want, I can do what I want. I believe his heart was slipping from the Lord. His heart wasn't as bright for the Lord. He had lost his edge. I think he was sloppy in his walk with the Lord. And in those days it was normal for women to be outside in a place to bathe. He didn't go looking for it. She was doing no wrong. So it's not Bathsheba's fault that she was out there. I've heard sermons about it, Bathsheba lured him. No. She was just having a bath. He was in the wrong position at the wrong time, and he got her. And in an instant, he broke 5 commandments. He coveted another man's wife. He told lies. He stole her. He committed adultery, and then he arranged for Uriah's death in just this one moment. But it didn't just happen. He wasn't this man who killed Goliath and he fell. His heart had become sloppy. He'd become slow in his walking. This can happen to all of us. Listening to stories about great men that fall, until we take our last breath, it can happen. Or great women that fall. We are never, ever immune. Yes, there's going to come a time when you're not going to be able physically to have all that. But pornography is not just about, remember I said pornography isn't about the actual act of sex. It's all about the mind. And so if it's about that, then it can get us at any stage in life. And so keep your hearts pure. It says in Proverbs 4:23, keep vigilant watch over your heart. That's where life starts. Don't talk out of both sides of your mouth. Avoid careless banter. Keep your eyes straight ahead. Ignore the sideshow distractions. Watch your step. Those words were written by David's son Solomon, who was the result of Bathsheba and David's affair. And he's saying, hey, I'm a result of what happened to my dad and mom. And he's saying, watch your heart. Keep your eyes straight ahead. Watch your step. And be careful. I'm just looking at the time, and time is kind of gone. So, I won't go into the detail of it, but there was such a cover-up. He did so much to cover things up. When he made a mistake, he just was like, oh, that verse I said, there is a way that appears right, but it leads to death. And actually, sometimes it leads to a natural death, a real death. Sometimes it's a death of your spirit, a death of your heart, a death of your love, a death of your marriage. And so with him, it was, he did all sorts of things. You can read the Bible. There's no time to go through it, but you can read the Bible. 4 different times David tried to cover his sin, tried to sort the problem, tried to fix the issue, tried to do everything. And then he gets confronted and he says, Lord, it's me. And, I was going to read Psalm 51. You maybe have time to read it. And Psalm 51 is amazing because this was a psalm that David wrote after he was found. And it says, oh, have mercy upon me, God. Because of your great compassions, blot out my sins. Wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin. For I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. And then he goes on, purify me, wash me. Give me my joy back again. Remove the stain and guilt and shame. Clean my heart, O God. Renew a loyal spirit within me. And so I just want to close with that. If you're in the situation, and I look back in my life, and there have been times where I have definitely flirted with different areas of pornography or different things. I can remember as a teenager getting a hold of a book and reading this book. It was really wrong. I was at boarding school. I bought this book, And that's how I got my sex education. This woman went into all this, and I remember reading it, and it stirred stuff up within me. And then I was so full of shame, I hid the book, and I would pick it up and read. I never got past the first chapter, but something stirred up within me, and it can happen to any of us. So what I'm saying is, if you find yourself in that position, you think, I've actually allowed my heart to wander, I'm not as focused on the Lord. I've allowed the Lord, I'm not as focused on Jesus as I should be, and I've allowed my heart to go different places. I've allowed different areas of pornography to come within me, and I just want to, and I love this. Go back and read chapter 51 of Psalms, where he says, oh Lord, please let me be loyal again. Please give me my joy back again, because he wasn't in a joyful place. He was in a place where he was scheming and planning someone else's downfall. That would have never been David's plan. But it's amazing how the downward spiral of sin can take us. So there will be a few questions we'll put up. I'm just going to hand back to Kath just now. There will be a few questions to discuss in our groups and things like that. If you have areas that you want to talk about, honestly, there's so many different people that you can talk to and things. But you know what? You don't have to talk to anybody. The most important thing is you talk to Jesus. You can go to him and just say, Lord, you know what I've done again? I'm just so ashamed. I'm so embarrassed. Can you please help me? Can you help me draw the line? Can you do things? And he brings no condemnation, no accusing finger. His voice is there to build you up and to let you live the best life that you can live. Right, Kath?